Los Angeles, January 1947. The city lived in two dimensions. By day, bright, glamorous, drenched in sunshine and promises. By night, cold, shadowed, filled with alleys where dreams ended faster than they began. Elizabeth Short came to this city believing it would see her. She believed Hollywood was a door, not a wall, that one day cameras would stop, that her name would matter. Tall, fragile, with dark hair and porcelain-pale skin, she stood out even among thousands of hopefuls who arrived with the same dream. But Hollywood rarely loved back. Elizabeth lived temporarily, temporary rooms, temporary friendships, temporary hope. She smiled at people who never planned to remember her. January 15th, 1947, morning. A woman named Betty Bersinger was walking across a vacant lot in Leimert Park. She was heading home. Breakfast, children, routine. This place was often used as a dumping ground. Old furniture, trash, mannequins. That's what she thought she saw. A mannequin, white, too white, lying too neatly. She stopped, stepped closer, and realized it wasn't plastic. The body had been cut in half, cleanly, precisely, placed carefully as if arranged for discovery. No blood, none at all. The face bore a strange, horrifying smile, a smile that should not exist. Police arrived quickly, and almost immediately they knew this was not an ordinary murder. The body had been completely drained of blood. Every detail was deliberate, every mark intentional. This wasn't just killing, this was presentation. Within hours, the name was confirmed. Elizabeth Short, 22 years old, no permanent address, no steady job, no known enemies. The newspapers named her faster than the police found answers. The Black Dahlia. The name sounded beautiful, almost romantic, and completely false. Detectives stared at the photographs and felt the same thing. This case would not end quickly. Too controlled, too methodical, too theatrical. The killer had taken his time. The killer had control. And somewhere in the city, he was likely reading the morning papers, watching Los Angeles begin to fear. The city did not yet know this crime would become its longest shadow, a shadow that would never disappear. The city reacted the way it always did, loudly. Within hours, Los Angeles was drowning in headlines, photographs, speculation. The name Black Dahlia spread faster than the facts, turning a young woman into a symbol before anyone understood what had been done to her. The police felt the pressure immediately. Phones rang nonstop, tips poured in, hundreds of men were reported by neighbors, ex-lovers, co-workers, anyone who had ever looked suspicious in hindsight. The noise was overwhelming, but clarity was nowhere to be found. Elizabeth Short's life began to unravel in reverse. Detectives traced her final days through hotel registers, bus stations, bars near Hollywood Boulevard. She moved often, stayed briefly, left no anchor behind. She had been seen smiling days before her death, telling friends she was close to something. No one knew what that something was. Then the letters began. On January 24th, a package arrived at the Los Angeles Examiner. Inside were Elizabeth's personal belongings, her birth certificate, photographs, an address book. Everything had been carefully cleaned with gasoline. No fingerprints, no smudges. Attached was a note made of newspaper clippings. Here is Dahlia's belongings." The message was calm, almost polite. The killer wasn't hiding, he was communicating. More letters followed, each timed to keep the city anxious, each crafted to prove control. The police realized something unsettling. Whoever had done this wanted attention, but not capture. He enjoyed the balance, visible yet unreachable. Suspects emerged and collapsed just as quickly. A doctor, a former lover, a failed writer. One man confessed, then recanted. Another knew details he shouldn't have, but lacked evidence tying him to the crime. Alibis appeared, timelines shifted, nothing held. The crime itself offered few clues. The precision of the cuts suggested medical knowledge. The absence of blood indicated the murder occurred elsewhere. The careful placement of the body implied transportation and planning. This was not an impulsive act. It was deliberate, controlled, almost ritualistic. As days passed, fear changed shape. Women altered routines, doors stayed locked longer, Hollywood's glow dimmed just slightly, because the truth was becoming harder to ignore. If Elizabeth Short could vanish into the city and be reduced to a headline, anyone could. And somewhere in Los Angeles, the person responsible was still walking free, watching the investigation stumble, enjoying the chaos he had created. The Black Dahlia was no longer just a victim. She was a message. As weeks turned into months, the investigation began to fracture. Detectives were no longer chasing a single suspect. They were chasing shadows. Every promising lead dissolved under scrutiny. Every confession carried just enough truth to be tempting and just enough contradiction to collapse. But one name refused to disappear: Dr. George Hodel. He was intelligent, respected, a physician with access to surgical tools and medical knowledge that mirrored the precision of the crime. He lived near the area where Elizabeth had been seen, and, most unsettling of all, his behavior drew quiet attention from investigators. Too calm, too distant, too confident. Police placed his home under surveillance. What they heard unsettled them. Conversations that hinted at violence, statements that felt rehearsed. At one point, a voice, possibly Hodel's, was recorded saying words that froze the officers listening on the other end. "Suppose I did kill the Black Dahlia. They couldn't prove it now." But recordings were circumstantial, evidence was thin, and in 1947, thin evidence meant nothing in court. Hodel walked free. Other suspects followed similar paths. A bellhop who knew too much, a failed screenwriter obsessed with violent imagery, a man who claimed he had loved Elizabeth, then described her death in disturbing detail. Each one fell apart under pressure. Witnesses contradicted themselves. Timelines overlapped. Physical proof was missing. The killer had left behind fear, but not himself. Meanwhile, Elizabeth Short's image took on a life of its own. Photographs were reprinted endlessly, her smile frozen in time, her story rewritten by people who never knew her. She was portrayed as reckless, as naive, as someone who had invited her own fate. It was easier that way, because admitting the truth was far worse. She wasn't targeted for who she was chosen because she was vulnerable. And Los Angeles was full of people just like her. Inside the police department, frustration turned to silence. The case files grew thicker, the certainty grew thinner. Detectives who once believed they were close began to realize something terrifying. This killer had planned not only the murder, but the aftermath, the confusion, the spectacle, the dead ends. He had designed a crime that would outlive him. By the end of 1947, the Black Dahlia investigation was no longer advancing. It was drifting. And the city that once demanded answers slowly learned how to live without them. But unresolved crimes don't disappear. They wait. By 1948, the city had learned a new skill: forgetting. Not completely, not comfortably, but enough to move forward. The headlines shrank. The radio moved on. New crimes replaced old fears. The Black Dahlia case remained open, officially, but in practice it was drifting toward a quiet shelf, stacked among other unsolved horrors. Inside police headquarters, the tone had changed. No urgency, no late-night breakthroughs, no fresh optimism. Only boxes, reports, photographs handled too many times. Detectives were reassigned, leads went cold, witnesses moved away, changed stories, or died. The city kept growing, and Elizabeth Short became smaller inside it, reduced to a case number and a nickname that refused to fade. Theories filled the vacuum. Some believed the killer was a doctor who had fled the country. Others insisted it was a group crime, a secret too large to expose. Some whispered about Hollywood connections, about power and protection, about men who would never face questions. None of it could be proven, and proof was all that mattered. Years later, new investigators reopened the files. They saw what earlier detectives had missed or been unable to pursue. Patterns, behavior, psychology. This was not a crime of rage, it was a crime of control. The killer didn't panic, he didn't rush. He cleaned, he arranged, he waited to be discovered. That suggested someone who believed he was smarter than the system, and perhaps at the time he was. But belief is not evidence, and belief does not convict. Elizabeth's family never stopped asking questions. They watched strangers rewrite her life, judge her choices, reduce her to headlines and rumors. The truth, who she was, what she wanted, was buried beneath speculation. Justice was promised, then postponed, then quietly abandoned. By the time the Black Dahlia became a legend, the investigation had already failed. Not because there were no suspects, but because the moment to act had passed. And in unsolved cases, time is not neutral. Time protects the guilty. Decades passed, but the Black Dahlia never faded. She became more than a victim. She became a myth. Books were written, films inspired, names recycled, suspects resurrected and buried again. Each generation believed it might be the one to finally solve the case. None did. The evidence was gone. Witnesses were gone. The city that remembered 1947 no longer existed. What remained were fragments, police reports, grainy photographs, half-finished theories, and the uncomfortable truth that the killer had succeeded in the one thing he likely wanted most: to disappear. In later years, accusations grew louder. Dr. George Hodell's name resurfaced repeatedly, fueled by his own son's investigation decades later. Circumstantial evidence, disturbing coincidences, statements that felt too close to confession. But the law does not work on feelings. No arrest was made, no trial held, no verdict reached. The case remained officially unsolved. Elizabeth Short, however, never found peace. Her name became shorthand for brutality, her face became public property, her story endlessly retold, endlessly distorted. She was judged more harshly than the person who killed her, and perhaps that was the final injustice. The Black Dahlia case exposed something darker than one murderer. It revealed how fascination can replace compassion, how spectacle can outlive truth, how a city built on dreams can quietly accept an unanswered nightmare. Los Angeles learned to live with the shadow, but the shadow never left. Some crimes end with handcuffs, others end with silence. And the murder of Elizabeth Short ended not with justice, but with a question that still echoes through the city streets. Who did this, and how did he walk away?